All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bowser, for being here today. We look forward to talking to you. I asked Dr. Bowser to be here so that we could really get into the nitty gritty of equipment, machinery, maintenance, engineering, all of the things that seem to occasionally just like, well, that's somebody else's job, right? Unfortunately, quality people aren't always as keen on these things as would they need to be. Many sites are struggling very, very hard to get good maintenance folks or engineering folks who know what they're doing and also understand sanitary design. So that's what we have Dr. Bowser here for today to really talk to us about where we are, automation, mechanization, and what kinds of risk we need to be looking at, what kinds of things we need to be doing regularly to make sure that those risks do not transfer to a recall and an outbreak. And we want to get that information from those people who work in the industry and are great with it. So, Dr. Bowser, take it away. Can you tell us a little bit about what kinds of strengths we have in the industry right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the strengths are really there's many strengths. You see, especially there's a large proliferation of very well-made machines that are durable, that 100% stainless, or at least all the contact surfaces are stainless, and most of the support structures. You see some really phenomenal welding and finishing that's available now because of the excellent types of production machinery they have online to build equipment. I think that you see more and more companies have a better handle on how to make a sanitary piece of equipment, and that seems to be really promising. Also, I think that there's a lot more interest in like you mentioned earlier, long-term maintenance and actually flexibility for use. So you can adapt the machine to do different things in the future.
And so tell me when you're going to look at adaptation for future or maybe slightly different things, one of the things that I've noticed when I'm in a facility is they'll go for lots of automation thinking it's going to cut down on labor, of course. And what they kind of forget is to look at the commissioning process. They're saying, okay, we got this great piece of equipment, it's going to cut us out 20 FTEs. However, what they don't do a great job with, especially if they're getting equipment from Europe or China, which may or may not meet our regulations for sanitary design, and which may have some either suction cups or extra plastic or other pieces that are brittle and or may have harborage. So they may just not, the welds, I don't see as many rough welds anymore, right? Some of those are getting better. At least on the initial machine. Now, once we start getting into older machine that we're trying to keep up with, that's a whole different question. But when we're talking about commissioning, can you talk to us a little bit about commissioning and or an adjustment to the previous purpose and what kinds of risks we need to be looking at and how we would best review that?
Yeah, I think that's really an important topic, and I see this a lot in the field where people purchase, a very expensive piece of machinery, and just somehow their budget doesn't seem to include a lot of the installation costs. And like you said, the commissioning is a very big part of that cost. But even beyond that, sometimes it's the finishes that have to be provided on the floor, for example, the mounting pads, perhaps, of course, the utility connections. And in many cases, when you have a piece of machinery that requires clean in place connections, you could have some very expensive stainless tubing coming in and out of that machine. And depending on where your CIP skid sits in your plant, we're talking a very significant amount of money to get that connected. And oftentimes it's just not thought of. And in fact, probably one of the most unfortunate and difficult parts of my job is that I see that many people don't really consider, and they're going to put a CIP machine in, but they don't really consider plumbing in and out of that machine and how it happens. And sometimes it's extremely difficult to get the cleaning solutions supplied and returned it's in an easy manner. To install it, just a foot of 2-inch stainless tubing is going to be in the order of $500. So it's very high cost quickly. And when you have lots of valves, that just goes up exponentially, it seems like.
Exactly. And I see that for smaller sites that they don't have the expertise. They also are not looking at utilities and drainage. If can it take that flow, right? Can it take that flow in that short amount of time? We don't always see that. We don't always see where many regulations require that they treat their wastewater at least for a pH before it goes back into the municipal waters, or if there's any solids and things like that that they need to look at. So there's, I think, beyond just the equipment itself, like you're saying, there's lots of other things to talk about because, for instance, on your footing, we regularly see where those footings are not well sealed, and then you have some harborage, and you can see where the water goes in and out on occasion, especially after they're doing the floors. The foam may not get in there and under really well. On top of that, we also can see, the valves, like you said, not always they're not always set up correctly. There's just a lot of things going into those types of considerations that I think people don't take in the whole picture.
Yes, for sure. One thing that is really exciting is that the GFSI now, I've been told this, I haven't verified it, but now they are asking companies to provide purchase orders that include cleanability in the purchase order for new equipment.
So
Great stuff.
BRCGS has that specifically as a part of their thing, and then so in I believe it's 3.6. I'm sorry, take that back. 4.6 and 4.7. So 4.6 is equipment and commissioning, and 4.7 of BRC is maintenance. And then in generally in the manufacturing side, it should be 11.2.1 is maintenance and 11.1.7 is equipment. And they do talk about purchasing specifications, things like that. The problem I see with that is you can have a piece of equipment that is correct for the process without it becoming correct for the infrastructure, the build, the process within a specific site. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. So what I recommend is every piece of equipment the company purchases, every significant piece that has to be clean, right? It should have a request for a proposal. It should be lined up with a specification, how it's connected to other equipment, like you said, how it's connected to the utilities, including CIP, and how it sits in the plant, with the level of the situation, all the access space
Slopes,
that should be
like
built
that.
into the purchase agreement. And so I know they're taking a step in the right direction and they're starting to look at more trying to push this as a purchasing decision. And that's I think that's the way to get it done, really. And
Yeah,
the
really
purchasing
needs to have a
department,
lot of that engineering side to it.
yeah, the
Um,
purchasing department has to work with the people in the plant. And sometimes they just don't. That's not a connection that's made. I think seems like it's changing. I hope it does.
yeah, I think there's that. If it's part of strictly purchasing, in the larger plants, obviously they have engineers that take that into account. A lot of the smaller plants are going to get technical expertise from the equipment manufacturer,
The vendors themselves. That's
the
right.
vendors themselves, and that works well, if it's a
Can
good vendor, right? If
right?
the
It can.
vendor has expertise available and on the ground, and then that needs to be part of the request for proposal as far as for fixes. Is it always going to be over an internet connection that you're going to do a fix? Is all your diagnostics through an internet connection? And if so, then we got to think about food defense and can somebody hack into that? So I think there's a lot of those kinds of things that people don't think about when they're looking at machinery as well. Have you ever run into any of that kind of stuff?
In terms of the maintenance and the repair of equipment, yeah, absolutely. There's so many. You can waste a lot of time trying to fix it yourself, right? And the best way is to call the manufacturer, someone who's new with that machine. It works on in lots of different settings and has worked on all the evolutionary design and development of that thing. Usually, that's what you have with a seasoned repair person. And I agree with you. A phone call sometimes can. I've heard of, and I recognize that some people have called the manufacturer, literally held the telephone out to the machine, and what's this
Let 'em
sound?
hear it.
And they can fix it over the phone. It sometimes works. And but you have to have that. You can waste a whole lot of time. You can waste months and a whole lot of product problems if you don't get that directly fixed in the first place.
Yeah, the other thing that my sites have come across is if they bought specialized equipment from outside the country, and we had things like COVID, they literally couldn't get technicians. And so I think that becomes a consideration as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, it depends on where you purchase from, especially if you're purchasing it from Asia, some parts of Asia, it's really difficult. It's sometimes you get what you want, but it used to be you could buy something from Asia and just totally rehab it yourself, put all US belts and drives and
Right.
everything in there, controls. But nowadays you can still purchase it. It might work well, but so many of them have. You mentioned welds earlier. They're still not really, especially from China. Let's say there's just not
Right.
really good quality there. And yeah, you can't. I mean, we're talking. That's a a half a day difference in time. So it's really hard to get somebody when you need somebody.
I've actually had a couple of sites that bought a piece of primarily packaging equipment in this case,
Okay.
and they bought a cheap piece of equipment from Asia, and then they bought packaging from whoever their cheapest option was there. They did not align the packaging and the equipment that they wanted to buy so that it would work together. And they didn't. And so that multi $5 million piece of equipment was not working. And they still had to have the people on site to do the work. And they just, pretty much lost a ton of money. And they were having problems with getting follow up with the manufacturer because the manufacturer didn't want to give the the warranties and all of the other things. But people have to realize, like, so I do packaging audits too, and people have to realize that there are reasons for those packaging sites to have technical people that come in and help you with that alignments and machinery and all of those other things. But if you go cheap and cheap and you don't make sure that they work together, you could be in a problem.
It's for sure. I mean, it's really on you. If you buy two separate pieces of machinery, I don't care if they're expensive, they're from the US. If you buy two separate pieces and you aren't making sure they're going to fit together, all you're going to have is one company pointing at the other company, and you're stuck in the middle. Yeah. And you have no recourse really.
You're
And I
stuck in the
don't
middle,
blame them. I mean,
downtime, too not enough product, they're not able to meet your commitments, yeah, it's rough.
yeah,
So, yeah, those are some things. The other things that I've sometimes seen, or at least I've read based on outbreaks and recalls, is that fittings and O-rings and seals and other things like that, if when they put that piece of equipment in, if it is not correctly seated and not correctly put in, then you can have harborage, right? And that has been the root cause for a couple of pretty big situations, from
yes, it has.
what I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, it
So,
has.
can
In
you
fact,
talk a little bit more about gaskets and O rings and fittings and clamps and how that can impact food safety?
sure. So I agree. So with your assessment, there's so many recalls. I was just speaking to a meat manufacturer recently, and they had an enclosed space in a machine. They never really checked it out. They just brought the machine in. It's from a reputable manufacturer and a very big, well-known meat process equipment manufacturer, and it resulted in a recall because the enclosure wasn't sealed properly, and they just didn't know it. And eventually, it was a harborage for listeria, right? And so,
Right.
yeah, whenever you take delivery of any machine, and it probably happened during shipment, it probably got knocked out of whack. And so, you need to be looking at all those issues as soon as you receive that machine. It should be taken apart, put back together.
Maybe
Unfortunately,
some seal tests done even potentially, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, sure, seals
I mean,
test.
you definitely wanna do some environmentals. Yep, if it's a reused piece of equipment or a repurchased piece of equipment and somebody else has used it, you probably wanna do some allergen testing. You definitely need to do a heavy duty cleaning, right? So there's some other things that you need to do before you even put it in your plant.
That's right. You need to look it all over. And in fact, you really should have in your maintenance logs some idea of how you're going to replace those gaskets periodically and inspect those gaskets. And a lot of my clients nowadays are looking at colored gaskets or gaskets with a barcode. And
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, a lot of the smaller ones don't do that, but that's fantastic. That's
yeah,
something I need to think about when I'm looking for those kinds of things. So good. I love it.
yeah, it's inexpensive and it's fairly. I mean, it's visual, so it's good.
Right. Anything we can do visual is a ton better than relying on, yeah, it's the same black O-ring every time, right?
Yeah, in the old days, we just buy a gasket that's the same color as the food and then let it go, right?
It can be a problem.
But that's many years ago, right?
Sure.
You can't do that now. That's certainly we advanced past that.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yes,
I
me
hope
too.
so. So tell me about risks with automation. So one of the things that I don't see very often on a HACCP plan is because they'll talk about the processing risks and, let's say they have a validated process and some of those kinds of things. So, they're doing all their calibrations and then they'll do their depth checks or whatever the process is. But what I don't frequently see is how they go about doing full on validations. So I know a lot of there's labs that will do a lot of full on validations. If what their process is for regular calibration checks, what do you recommend for those kinds of things? What do you recommend for a site that has had equipment for a very long time. They have a huge history, and they say, "Well, we don't really think that the OEM suggestions for checks are appropriate anymore. We've been using this machine for 10 years." What are your thoughts?
I'd say to them, good luck. I was just recently at
I
a
love
cheese
it.
processor, okay, and
Okay.
their CIP system wasn't working like it should. Well, they never looked at flow rates. They never checked the flow rates. They never, they did it once when they installed it, and they're done,
Right.
right? And
Right.
and that's
That's a big one. That CIP validation is one I see regularly as a
yeah,
problem.
yeah, me too. I see it all the time,
Do you
and
now you are you seeing that the chemical company is doing a lot of that? Are you seeing that they have a special engineering process? And then what do you see for the sensor process? Like, so we get flows and we can get some pressure differentiations and things like that. But what about some sensors? Because people say, oh, the machine takes care of that. It's self calibrating. Well, I'm like, well, what if the sensor goes out? And they're like, oh, it never goes out. I'm like, time out. Sensors go out. So talk to me about that.
yeah. So the guys that are real serious about it, they're going to have double sensors, and they're going to have a backup sensor everywhere, okay?
Okay.
And that's, I mean, is essential, and it's affordable if you're looking at large scale, okay? And if you're looking at small scales, then you can't afford lots of sensors, but you need to have a program where you're checking that thing, calibrate it, and of course everybody has to have that calibration.
Everybody has to have calibration. Yep.
But especially if you don't have any backups, and you have to be checking the condition of those sensors all the time. Like I mentioned, this CIP system in a very large plant, they never, as far as I know, like I said, check flow rates, and it
And
wasn't
I'm
clear.
sure there were GFSI, so
It
where's
wasn't
the
clear to me
auditor on that one, huh?
how they even calibrated their temperature sensors in there, and so
They
they
never calculated the temperature sensors?
that wasn't clear to me how they did it. Pressure, pressure, flow, and
Oh,
temperature,
crap,
obviously the
that's
big
awful.
three. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so if you ask them these questions and they just look at you like, mm, there's something wrong and something should be.
Oh, that's rough.
It's no
So,
wonder why your machine doesn't get clean.
yeah. Well, okay, so I'm gonna break in here and go, look, if you're paying 10 grand or more for a GFSI auditor to come in and audit you, and you've just got a 97 and they didn't ask you about that and say something about that, you just lost $10,000 that didn't protect you.
Yeah.
So your auditor is there to protect you, to help you. I mean, yes, they have to write an audit report, blah, blah, blah. But if they're not asking you the questions that say, I hadn't thought about that, we got to take that care of that, then, and possibly even writing nonconformances, then there's a problem. Like,
That's for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of auditors, they're faced with some of these big plants. It's a short visit. They only have so many things they can look at, and
there's definitely the
realistically,
process
they're
of
just
like it's a sampling, right?
it's a
But
sampling. Yeah,
calibration is always on the audit report. 6.4 in BRC, 11.2.3 in SQF. Always on the audit report. So there's always a requirement to have a list of calibration items. There's always a requirement to have a sequence or a cadence for those calibration items. And then
mhm.
there's always a requirement to have them done in reasonable amount of time. Where's the oops? Validation is validation. So let me ask you this. A
Sure.
lot of sites will say that I did a calibration. I've now validated my machine and my process. What is your answer to that statement?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, a valid process, you have to examine the results periodically, right?
Right?
And of course, you have to keep up with all of those, like we just talked about, all the calibrations, everything. But yeah, I think to me,
Like,
I'm more interested in seeing a robust process from the engineering side, and a robust
okay.
process has a lot of durability, and it's designed so that if there's a small issue in there, it's covered by it's the noise is not going to be significant to the final results. So you design a robust process, you get it validated, and you keep it within those lanes, like I mentioned. You have an upper and lower limits of everything. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be great.
So it's not just the calibration, the one time a year, whatever, 3 times a year, 5 times a year, whatever it is. It is we also have a range and a lot of data points and managing the data points that are appropriate. Because here's the thing I see. I see people getting data points all over the place. Those data points have nothing to do with the decision making process. They
It's a
have
truth.
so
Mhm.
much data that they don't even know where they're at, what they're doing. And so that data, if that data is not going to drive an action, it's useless data, in my opinion.
Well, I see it especially in environmental swabs. People just do environmental swabs everywhere, but it's just someplace they can reach. I said, what about, what about that pipe over there? Can you break that pipe open and take a swab inside?
Disassemble.
You've never done that. Well, that's where you need to be looking. That's the most likely, kind of the most difficult spot to clean. That pipe should be, there should be a clamp there so you can take it apart, look inside,
Right?
at least look at it, that swab it for sure. And that's another thing I see people swab, but they don't really look at stuff. And that's,
Yeah. So they're not looking for biofilms. They're not looking for anything like that. It's pretty like, oh, there's a biofilm right there. You can just kind of
yeah,
see it. It's
you
like,
could smell it maybe, right?
yeah, yeah.
But they're not really paying attention to that. They just do a swab and we're good. And that's kind of
Too
scary
much
too.
check the
It's
box,
sort of
maybe,
a,
huh?
I don't know, a little hospitality. Exactly. Exactly.
Too much
So we
check
got
the
to watch
box.
out for those checking the box things. Sure.
Yes. So when you're looking at a site design, this is one of the things we want to kind of come back to from some of the other stuff you was talking about with piping and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
One of the things that a recent outbreak had some information about was a chain over a hopper and some dripping for listeria. Well, to me, part of that commissioning process would be, where is that? What are the things above it? I mean, between chipping paint or whatever else, chains that could drip listeria, any of those kinds on an open hopper. So those are the things that people need to think about. It's not just the machine. It's not just the utilities. It's the whole 3D picture, right? Of where is this? What is this? How are we doing? What are the other risks? When you look at a design for a new or a remodeled facility, what are the things that you are looking for?
I really look for what I call the three M's. It's pretty common: the moves, the materials, and the methods. Those are the three things I look at. So I'm guessing that chain is probably a hoist, right? A hoist chain. Maybe or it could be replace a agitator shaft or something like that, and it needs to be out of there, out of the way when it's not, when they're in production, unless they're using it for part of production. So there's things like that, and that's, I would count that in as a move. How you move as you're repairing something maybe, or transferring materials. That would be some issue to be taking a close look at.
And those 3 items that you just mentioned would also be on your root cause analysis if you were doing an Ishikawa fishbone diagram. Is that not correct?
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's very
Okay. So in a lot of cases, when we do nonconformances and an audit, we get, oh, the 5 whys. Well, the 5 whys don't do the best of jobs, in my personal opinion, for really looking at manufacturing from a manufacturing perspective. If I have a site that does a root cause on their nonconformance and they use the 5 whys, it's generally pretty narrow. It doesn't get us a deep investigation. However, if I see a site that doesn't the Ishikawa or fishbone diagram, and they look at every one of those potential issues, methods, measurement, people, all that stuff, then I usually get a 3 or 4 part. Hey, we need to fix this and this and this and this because all those stars aligned for that nonconformance. So you're telling me that that's what you're looking for regularly when you're doing that engineering.
Yes, yeah, I think so too. And I think that when you're on the subject of root cause analysis, I think a lot of people just don't know what a root cause is. Unfortunately, they
Seems to
look
be a
at
problem.
a symptom and say that's the problem, and often case it really isn't. So, for example, let's say you have a potable water source for your plant, and you have a filtration system, right? Well, the filtration system, maybe it's not effective, so you wind up with the contamination. So what is the root cause? They might say, well, the water's contaminated, right? It had some kind of a foreign material in there. Well, that's already been accepted. We know that there's a chance of contamination. That's an understood fact. You've got a filter in place for that. So the real root cause is, what happened in that filter? Why did that filter fail? Okay, then I think that's kind of an example of a misconception I see a lot in industry, just not really understanding what the root cause is.
When you look at root causes, is that something that people should probably be asking for some expert help on? Is that some things that people can connect with extensions and things like that to really get some good detailed work with?
Really what's important is bringing a fresh set of eyes, right? I think that's what you're leading to, and
Yeah,
that's
it
my
is.
experience. You need someone who obviously knows a little bit about what you're doing. It doesn't have to be a absolute subject matter expert, but someone who can just walk in there fresh and say, "Oh my gosh, that's there. Look at that." And you
Ask
might
the
just
right questions, maybe?
exactly ask the right questions or point out the right things,
Right.
and it could be very surprising what you find out. And I do that all the time when I visit plants. It's fun to do because people don't necessarily have the same viewpoint I do. Like I said, they just get in a rut, and it's nice to point out for them, hopefully in advance, before something happens, where they might help out.
Yeah, and we used to see a lot of really strong maintenance folks in the industry. That seems to be we seem to be losing a lot of our expertise. Those long-term people who understand both the mechanized process and more of the automated process because they've kind of been there, done that. I have sites that are really struggling to get good maintenance, good engineering folks who are hands-on. Right?
Yes.
They really need to be hands-on in order to do our kind of work. I've seen several that have hired people from outside other manufacturing industries, but then they don't really get the whole sanitary design, personal hygiene, and some of those other things. Do you have any suggestions for sites who are trying to attract good folks who really get it for the maintenance and engineering side of things?
Absolutely. So I think that what really helps is I think a lot of it's the education system. Okay, so I work at the university. Obviously, I got OSU shirt on here, and that's my job. But even in higher ed right now, we're realizing that is an issue. So there's a lot we're graduating a lot of students who don't have a good hands-on understanding. In my type of a major, biosystems and ag engineering, used to be agricultural engineering. You
Right.
get normally you get kids that have been on the farm and they know how to fix things. They know how to make things work because they have to,
Yeah.
and that's just the background they get. But nowadays, there's just fewer and fewer people like that. They're not mechanics.
They
And,
don't fix their cars, they don't fix their bikes, they
right.
don't have that wrench in hand process.
Right, exactly right. And so we aren't graduating those types of people. However, in the past 5 years, right here at OSU, we started what they call an AST, an Ag Science Technology program. So these students are getting a lot more exposure to things like welding and machine design, or they're actually hands-on repairing motors and drives, and they're understanding electricity, things like that. So that there's a really helpful and I think potentially useful graduates that are coming out soon, not just from OSU, but other campuses around the country that are kind of going this direction because they realize there's a gap. I mean, there's certainly a lot of vocational technical schools, but we're getting, I think, a higher level of understanding and a mixture of business and technology. And so these could be really valuable in maintenance and actually operations and personnel too.
Is that going across robotics, machine learning, and actual mechanical, gears and drives and things like that? So they have kind of the whole gamut because at least in food, we're seeing everything from I have some sites that have 150-year-old equipment still running.
Oh,
And
no,
then I
you're
have some
right. That's
sites that
true.
are like it's the newest, latest, greatest, and practically a robot. Like robotic arms are just a thing, but other beyond that,
Yeah, I think that so our RAST program, it's just an undergraduate program, but they do get exposure to what I call mechatronics, and that's really valuable. I think, and like you said, that's pointing to the types of maintenance you see in the food industry, and at least an understanding of what those things, what the issues are, and where to go, and how to troubleshoot, and to speak with the equipment designers. Equipment, let's face it, it's getting a lot more complicated these days. It is computerized. When it's computerized, it could be a lot easier. It should be easier, but in the days, back in the days, it had one drive and it had to connect to the entire every component aboard a packaging machine. Let's say, for example, and everything was in sync because you had a single motor and a single, like a Geneva drive that managed all the actuators. Well, now it's individual. It's off a clock on a computer, and it's a whole
lot of the timing potential.
lot easier to troubleshoot that mechanically. But electronically, it could be a nightmare too, depending on what happens. These food industry job sites are extremely difficult for electronics.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm seeing sites. consider or have to look at is
Mhm.
they want to go to more mechanization, they want to go to more automation, they want to go to more robotics. However, they don't regularly take on the fact that if you have adjusted volume, like up and downs on your requirements as far as your processing, you're not processing consistently, you're not processing the same thing consistently, those kinds of downtime, those kinds of startups, those kinds of requirements for changeovers really impact whether the ROI on these machines is coming through as expected. And many cases, in order to make sure that they can run consistently, they almost need two. So that if you are down on one, you can run on the other. So that's a ton of throughput you need to be putting in there to have that ROI work for you. Do you see that process in the evaluation of equipment when people are looking at new equipment? Are they looking at, hey, by the way, something goes wrong, downtime gets bad, we can't meet our customers' requirements, that kind of thing?
Yeah, unfortunately, I see a lot of, especially new companies, startup companies, and companies that, like you said, don't have an involved, advanced maintenance and engineering department. They're not doing any of that stuff. They don't have backups. They may not even have a backup drive in the house. I started working in the food industry with a company that said, "Well, everything we have on every machine is going to have this type of drive, this controller on it, and that way, we can just stock a few spares and we can fix everything in the whole shop." They don't do that anymore, unfortunately.
Didn't
Especially
work
you
very well,
mentioned
huh?
earlier, you're talking about getting stuff from overseas,
Yeah.
and if you just you're bringing in, it could be something that you have never even seen before. No one else has either. It's
Right.
local.
Right. Yeah, we during COVID, I know from the overseas portion, there if there was a problem, boy, you were down. You couldn't get parts, you couldn't get technicians. The language barrier for some of those folks cuz their jargon and our jargon are two different things. We call things different stuff even in different sides of the country, right? Really. So, they might have a camera, but the camera doesn't have good resolution. You can't get in, you know, to get in to see where you need to go, you'd have to have a camera with an arm on it, and like it was a thing. Do you recommend that people get U.S. made products then for those kinds of reasons, or do you say, oh, you can get that, but here's the things you need to look at?
Well, what I recommend is you get what works for you and you stick with that. Like I mentioned earlier, you want to, if you decide you want to work with Allen Bradley drives and Bradley controls, that's what you do for everything. And it's going to cost a little bit more, but most companies, they don't mind. You tell them what drive you want, what controllers you want, they'll put it on there. Even a lot of Asian countries will do that for you. Uh, Probably the higher level ones will do that. Or when you get it in, that's the first thing you do is tear those things out and replace it with the Baldor drive, whatever it is you like and it works for you. I don't think it has to be anything in particular, just what you feel like your trained people can manage and operate well.
Have you seen any issues with tariffs coming over from a perspective of parts and things of that nature?
So I've talked to a lot of my clients, and I haven't got a lot of feedback on tariffs so far. I think it's gonna, it could be an issue. Everybody's waiting to see how long these are going to last, and I don't.
Right.
It's just a stage and shell game. It's not. I don't think it really matters yet. But
Yeah, it
that's
probably
my. I'm
the
being
the
naive. I don't know
rare
all
earth
the details.
mineral, like the rare earth magnets to some degree, only if it extends too long. But a lot of people got during COVID, they realized they had a problem, and then they got an extra backup for the most part, and they're doing their pull tests or their Gauss meters or whatever, and so they're managing it that way. I haven't seen a lot of people get hung up on that right now. They did during COVID. 'Cause they were running into they were thinking just in time, and just in time, and then just in time completely stopped. So, that made people back up their supply chains quite a bit, and while there are still a few of my sites that probably still have some just in time, they brought a lot of that they onshored some of it, and then they understood the risks and kind of made adjustments to the supply chain for a lot of those things that they thought were too big of a risk to leave on just in time from Asia.
I think that's a very good, accurate assessment. Yeah, I talked to a client just last week, and they're making a food product. They're seeking to make it in Mexico, And believe it
Okay.
or not, it's because it's primarily made in China and the tariffs and everything are just eating them alive. But
Right.
they're going to import probably half of their ingredients from China anyhow. But they're gonna when they make it there in Mexico, it's gonna be called Mexican, and the tariff's gonna be right. It's gonna be
Less, maybe, or at least,
much less. Yeah,
yeah.
almost nothing. Right? They got a special agreement because they're close to the border, and
Right.
they're gonna be able to bring it right in. But so people are finding ways to right away to sanitize and reduce tariffs.
Reduce that. It's not
Yeah.
quite as big of a impact as everybody initially talked about, perhaps. So,
People are very creative on how they get things and where they come from.
yes, they are. Yes, they are. I mean, we know that from honey. Honey does the same thing. The Chinese have put some of their Chinese honey through Vietnam, and so now Vietnam has a review of their export stuff too. So it becomes quite the thing. That was great information, and we invite you to like, subscribe, and share. You can find more information and additional resources at heavensentfoodsafety.com. Join us next time for another episode of Quality Intelligence Food Safety.